A young nurse covered a sleeping man, with her jacket at the hospital. The millionaire CEO woke up, and she changed his life forever. The corridor outside the ICU was a sterile purgatory, bathed in the cold, unforgiving glow of fluorescent lights. It was the kind of light that made everything feel a little more sterile, a little more distant. The ticking of the wall clock was the only real sound, a monotonous heartbeat echoing through the otherwise still hallway, interrupted now and then by the soft, rhythmic hum of machines working behind heavy doors. Daniel Wexler sat alone on a narrow bench, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. His suit, a masterpiece of Italian tailoring, was wrinkled and slightly askew, as though it hadn't been taken off in days. His hair was unkempt, his designer tie loosened and twisted. He was a monument to success, now crumbling under the weight of a silence that was deafening. To a passerby, he might have looked like a man taking a nap. But up close, he looked like a man barely holding himself together. Grace Reynolds, a young nurse finishing her late-night rounds, spotted him as she turned the corner. She had worked enough night shifts to recognize the quiet despair that clung to people in this very hallway. But something about this man, his profound stillness, his crushing silence made her pause. He was the picture of power brought low, the kind of broken that money could not mend. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a light jacket, the one she always kept for long, cold nights. With careful, practiced steps she approached, her movements as slow and gentle as falling snow. She meant only to drape the jacket over his shoulders, to offer a small kindness without words. Just as her fingers brushed the fabric of his suit, Daniel stirred. He flinched and looked up, his eyes startled and raw. They met hers. His were red and glassy, rimmed with a fatigue so deep it seemed etched into his soul. Grace's breath caught in her throat. He looked like a man unraveling at the seams. "Did you just cry?" she asked softly. It was a simple question, but it cracked something open inside him. Daniel didn't respond right away. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek, followed by another. His breath shuddered, and then, without warning, he wept. His head dropped, his shoulders shook. It was the kind of raw, gut-wrenching crying that comes from years of silence, of holding everything in. Grace didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, still, calm, and quietly present as he let it all fall apart. Daniel sat in silence for a long time after the crying subsided. His breathing had steadied, but his shoulders remained heavy, as if the weight of grief and guilt had seeped deep into his bones. Grace hadn't moved. She remained nearby, not pressing, not prying, just being there. The soft hum of the hospital continued around them, indifferent and ceaseless. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse and low, as though each word scraped its way out of him. "Alice, my daughter, she's in there," he said, his eyes flicking toward the ICU doors. "She's 3, just 3, he whispered, "and she's unconscious. They're still running tests. No one can tell me if she's going to be okay." Grace turned slightly toward him, her hands resting gently in her lap. She said nothing, but her eyes locked on his with a quiet, steady intensity. Daniel took a slow, shaky breath. His hands trembled. "I wasn't home," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "She woke up in the middle of the night and went looking for me. Climbed the stairs by herself. I wasn't there to stop her." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and shook his head. "I was still at the office. Another late meeting. Another last-minute email, another damn excuse." Grace's heart clenched, but she remained still, letting his words carry their own immense weight. "She just wanted me to read her a bedtime story," he said, bitterness rising in his throat. "That's it. That's simple. And I wasn't there." He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands again. The tears had stopped. Now there was just rawness. "I gave her everything. Nannies, toys, the best clothes, a private preschool. Everything money can buy," he said, his voice hardening. "But not me. I thought if I just worked harder, made more, she'd be safe, she'd be okay." He let out a hollow laugh that died in the air. "My wife, her mom, Melissa, she passed away 2 years ago," he said. "A sudden stroke. One moment we were making dinner, the next she was gone, just like that." Grace's eyes softened even more, but she still did not interrupt. "I tried to hold it together for Alice," he went on. "I threw myself into the company, into rebuilding everything. I thought if I could just keep it all together, keep us afloat, she'd never have to know what it's like to be without. He stared at the floor, his expression desolate. But she does know. She knows better than anyone. I wasn't really there, not the way a father should be. The silence returned, heavy and aching. Daniel looked up, blinking slowly. If something happens to her, he whispered, if she doesn't wake up, I won't be able to forgive myself, not ever. His voice broke again on the last word. Grace, still quiet, reached out and placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding, not rushed or performative, just real, human. She didn't say, it's not your fault. She didn't tell him to stop blaming himself. She knew those words would only fall flat. Instead, she gave him her silence, her presence, and her calm. Then after a moment her voice came, soft but firm. She's in good hands, she said. The doctors here are some of the best. And your little girl? She's strong. Daniel nodded slightly, his throat too tight to respond. Grace let her hand rest just a second longer, then slowly drew it back. And you're here now, she added, her eyes meeting his. That's what matters. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. There was no judgment in her gaze, just steady warmth, and something else he hadn't felt in a long, long time, trust. You need to rest, Mr. Wexler, she said gently. Alice will need you when she wakes up, and she will. Daniel let out a shaky breath, part exhaustion, part tentative relief. Thank you, he whispered. Grace gave him a small, kind nod, her blonde hair catching the light as she stood. I'll check in on her again soon, she said, her voice a comforting presence. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone, but a little less broken than before. Grace Reynolds had grown used to a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that sleep could never truly fix. It was the quiet weight of responsibility, carried day after day without complaint. On paper, she was a full-time nurse at one of the busiest hospitals in the city. But beyond the scrubs and the long shifts, she was a daughter, a sister, and the steady heart of a small, struggling family. Every morning at 7 a.m., Grace clocked out and walked home. Their apartment was tucked into a modest neighborhood, filled with cracked sidewalks and kids playing in the afternoons. By the time she arrived, her mother would be awake, a heating pad wrapped around her arthritic knees. Years of rheumatoid arthritis had slowed her down, but not her spirit. Grace would greet her with a tired smile, then head to the stove. Breakfast was simple, oatmeal or toast if they had it. Lily, her 10-year-old sister, would wander in, sleepy-eyed, hug her big sister and start chatting about dreams or cartoons. Grace packed Lily's lunch while they ate. Afterward, Grace would walk Lily to school, hand in hand, making sure her sweater was zipped and her shoes were tied. No matter how tired Grace felt, Lily always came first. Once Lily was through the school gates, Grace returned home, gave her mother her morning medications, then rested for a few hours, before preparing to do it all over again. Their life was modest but full of a quiet, resilient love. At the hospital, Grace was known for her competence and warmth. She remembered patients' names, offered tissues during hard moments, and had a way of calming the most anxious souls. One afternoon, a few days later, Daniel arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He passed a small patient lounge and saw Grace sitting beside an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The woman was bundled in a shawl, her hands frail and curled. Grace held a thermos. I made this last night, she said, unscrewing the lid. Chicken and ginger broth, my mom's recipe. It might help a little. The woman smiled weakly. If it tastes as good as it smells, I'll want a second helping. Daniel lingered unseen near the door. Grace gently spoon-fed the woman, chatting about a squirrel in the break room. Then the woman's eyes welled up. Too hot? Grace asked softly. The woman shook her head. No, it's perfect. It tastes just like what my mother used to make. I haven't had that taste in over 10 years. Grace handed her a tissue, her voice warm. Then I guess our moms had something in common. Daniel quietly stepped away, but the image stayed with him. That evening, he caught Grace outside Alice's room. I saw you earlier, he said. Grace looked puzzled. Where? With the woman in the lounge, he replied. The soup. That moment. She smiled shyly. Oh, she looked like she needed something warm. My mom always says food made with love is the best kind of medicine. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. That's something I never really knew how to give. Grace tilted her head slightly, then smiled. It's never too late to learn, she said. And then she walked down the hallway, quiet, steady, unforgettable. Something shifted in Daniel that night, and it stayed. Daniel found himself returning to the hospital earlier each day. He answered fewer emails. He postponed conference calls. For the first time in years, Daniel Wexler let the world spin without him. Grace remained the same, diligent, composed, and softly cheerful. But Daniel started to notice more. He noticed the way she connected with people, especially with Alice. Each time Grace entered Alice's room, it was as if the air changed. She'd knock playfully on the doorframe. "Special delivery for one royal patient." Or permission to enter the castle of Princess Alice? Alice, still weak but now alert, would light up at the sight of her. Her pale, tired face would soften into a genuine smile. Grace always crouched down to Alice's level, her voice animated. "So, my lady, today's question is, do we want to be a brave doctor saving lives? Or a super cool superhero flying through walls?" Alice giggled every time. "Can I be both?" "You may," Grace replied with a grin, "but only if you promise to teach me your secret powers." One afternoon, Grace wheeled Alice through the hospital garden. The late sun cast golden rays over the flowers. Daniel followed at a distance, unannounced, unnoticed. He stepped outside just far enough to see, but not intrude. Grace bent down and plucked a small yellow flower from the grass. She twirled it between her fingers before handing it to Alice. "This is a magic flower," she whispered conspiratorially. "A super secret kind. It helps brave girls heal even faster." Alice clutched it tightly in her small hands. "Really?" Grace smiled. "Really, really." Daniel watched as Alice hugged the flower to her chest. Her eyes sparkled, her laugh rang out, light and free. The moment struck him harder than he expected. No boardroom, no investment, no innovation could give Alice what that one small flower and the woman who gave it just had. He sat alone in the waiting area for a while, a strange tightness in his chest. And then the thought came sudden and uninvited. If she were Alice's mother... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He pictured Grace at their dinner table, helping with homework, a soft presence filling the silence he had lived in for so long. He shook it off. "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered. She was kind, compassionate, but he was broken in ways she didn't deserve. Still that night, when Alice fell asleep clutching the yellow flower, Daniel stood by her bedside and whispered silently into the dark, "Thank you, Grace." It was a quiet Tuesday when Grace asked him. They were standing outside Alice's room. "You've been here almost every evening lately," she said softly. "Have you eaten anything that wasn't from a vending machine?" Daniel gave her a faint smile. "I had coffee, twice." She laughed, shaking her head. "That doesn't count." There was a pause. Then, in a tone that was casual but somehow nervous, she added, "If you're free tonight, would you want to join me and my family for dinner?" Daniel blinked. "Your family?" "My mom and little sister," she said quickly. "Nothing fancy, just a real meal. It might be good for you." He considered declining. He always did. But this time, something in her eyes made him nod. "Okay," he said, "I'd like that." Later that evening, Daniel followed Grace's car to a modest apartment complex. The building was old but well kept, with warm window lights glowing against the darkening sky. Grace opened the door to a small apartment that smelled of garlic and herbs. Inside, everything was tidy and clearly loved. Drawings on the fridge, crocheted blankets on the couch. "Mom, Lily, this is Mr. Wexler," Grace said. "Daniel," she corrected herself, glancing at him with a shy smile. Her mother, a woman with kind eyes and stiff hands, greeted him warmly. "We've heard a lot about you," she said. Lily, a bright-eyed 10-year-old, peeked from the hallway. "You're Alice's dad." Daniel smiled. "Guilty." Dinner was simple, stir-fried vegetables, steamed rice, and a big pot of chicken stew that smelled like comfort itself. The table was small, with 4 mismatched chairs, but it felt like the most welcoming place Daniel had sat in years. They talked about school, favorite books, and how Lily thought Grace's hospital shoes were the ugliest things on the planet. There was laughter and the easy rhythm of a family that had learned to support each other through everything. Daniel mostly listened, but he smiled more than he had in a long time. At one point he looked around the table. the dim light casting a soft glow. Something deep and unfamiliar tugged at him. When Grace sat beside him again, he looked down at his empty plate. Quietly, he said, "It's been a long time since I felt like I was sitting at home." The table grew quiet. Grace's eyes met his. Her mother smiled, understanding more than he had said. "It's nothing special," Grace said softly. "It's everything," Daniel replied. Later, as he helped clear the dishes, Lily pressed a small, hand-drawn picture into his palm. It was of a stick figure family, a little girl, her dad, and a blonde woman holding hands. Daniel stared at it for a long time after he got home that night. He left it on the nightstand beside his bed. And for the first time in years, he slept without dreams of regret. Only memories of warmth and the quiet echo of laughter around a kitchen table. Change came quietly for Daniel, like sunlight creeping across a room. It started with a single decision. He called his assistant one morning. "Block out my calendar after 6 p.m. permanently." There was a long pause. "Sir, you mean for today?" "No," he said, glancing at Alice beside him with a picture book. "I mean for good." From then on, every day at 5:30, he left the office. He began picking Alice up from school himself. The first time she squealed so loudly her teacher turned in surprise. "Daddy!" she cried, running into his arms. He lifted her high, hugging her so tightly she laughed. He realized how much he had missed. He learned she loved grape jelly but hated strawberry, that her favorite color was now purple, not pink, and that she wanted to be a Dr. Princess astronaut. Each night he sat beside her bed and read aloud. At first he stumbled through the fairy tales, his voice stiff. But Alice would giggle and help him, and slowly the stiffness melted away. One night she handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it and felt his throat tighten. It was another drawing, 3 figures holding hands. A tall man, a little girl, and a blonde woman in scrubs. He looked at her. "Is this us?" he asked. Alice nodded proudly. "That's you, that's me, and that's Nurse Grace. She's my best friend." He swallowed hard. "It's beautiful," he whispered. In Alice's world, they were already a family. Later that night, he sent a short email to his executive assistant. Subject, new policy. "No meetings scheduled after 6 p.m. Family time is non-negotiable. Block it across all calendars." He hit send and closed the laptop. Grace continued to visit, now not just as a nurse but as a friend. They started having coffee in the hospital courtyard, talking about life, grief, and hope. He still had moments of doubt, but when Alice grabbed his hand, or when Grace smiled at him with that quiet, knowing look, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He was a father becoming someone his daughter could count on, and that was enough. The hospital never truly slept, but some mornings felt gentler than others. Daniel stood in the courtyard sipping coffee as the sun rose. He'd just walked Alice to her first outpatient therapy session. She skipped beside him, still clutching the flower Grace had given her, now pressed inside a small plastic case. His phone buzzed. Board meeting at 9 a.m. He silenced it without a second thought. Through the glass doors, he spotted Grace walking beside an elderly patient, always present, always steady. He admired her, though the word felt too small. A few days later, he overheard 2 nurses talking near the break room. "She's not taking extra shifts this week. Her mom's going in for surgery." "Finally," the other asked. "I thought they couldn't afford it." "They can't, but it's worse now. Grace will figure something out. She always does." Daniel stood frozen. That night, once Alice was asleep, he made a few quiet calls. Grace's mother was scheduled for joint replacement surgery. Insurance barely covered half. The payment plan was steep. The next morning, Daniel paid the remaining balance in full. Anonymously. He left an envelope at the front desk with Grace's name on it. Inside was the paid-in-full receipt and a small folded note, from someone who once received a jacket on a cold night. That evening, Grace was called to the desk. She opened the envelope, confused. Her eyes scanned the receipt, then widened, her hand shook. It took her only a second to know who had sent it. The tears came later, quietly, as she sat on the same bench where she'd once found a broken man. She cried because someone had seen her struggle and answered it, not with pity but with care, with memory. The next day she found Daniel waiting in the hallway. When he looked up and saw her, he stood. You didn't have to, she said softly. I know, he replied. I would have figured it out. I know that too, he said, but I also know how it feels to carry everything alone. She held his gaze. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was not about money. It never had been. It was about being seen. And in that brief, wordless embrace, Daniel understood. This was what Grace really looked like. Spring arrived gently, as if the world itself had decided to breathe again. The trees outside the hospital bloomed. Alice was no longer a pale, silent little girl. She now ran through the park with a wide grin, happy and healthy. Daniel had stepped down as CEO. No press release, no headlines, just a quiet announcement. His new milestones were measured in bedtime stories and breakfast pancakes. He founded a nonprofit organization called Home is Love, dedicated to helping single parents reconnect with their children. His relationship with Grace had evolved naturally, built on shared moments, morning coffees, and Saturday afternoons in the park with Alice flying kites. One sunny Sunday, the three of them sat beneath a tree. Out of nowhere, Alice looked up and asked, "Daddy, can Nurse Grace be my new mommy?" The question was so innocent that both adults froze. Grace's eyes widened. Daniel sat up, blinking. Then he let out a warm, surprised laugh. Grace laughed too, blushing a little. Daniel looked at Grace, and for the first time, he didn't turn away from the thought that had once scared him. "I think," he said softly, meeting her eyes, "that's a wonderful question." Grace looked at him, her eyes shining, and smiled. Nothing else needed to be said. A year later, on a sun-drenched afternoon, they returned to the hospital courtyard. The benches were still there, the same flowers lined the path. It was their wedding day. Small, intimate, and perfect. Grace's mother, walking with ease now, wiped away a happy tear. Alice, the flower girl in a purple dress, giggled as she tossed petals. Daniel stood opposite Grace, his hands holding hers. "You found me in the dark," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You put a jacket over my shoulders, but you warmed my soul. You woke me up." Grace smiled, her own tears glistening. "And you," she replied, her voice soft and full. "You showed up right on time." Alice ran to them, wrapping her small arms around their legs. "Group hug," she declared. And so, in the golden light, they stood as one. Father, daughter, and the woman who had made their world whole again. A family built not on wealth or power, but on a simple act of kindness, in a sterile hospital hallway, home. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, healing, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the beauty in small acts of kindness, or gave you hope that even the most broken moments can lead to something whole, then you're exactly where you need to be. At Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in the power of storytelling, to heal, to connect, and to inspire. Every week, we bring you real and heartfelt tales that remind us what truly matters: family, compassion, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. If you felt something today, please don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could touch your soul. Because sometimes, one story is all it takes to change a life, maybe even your own. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.